But I called for rent signs. I found a couple landlords with vacant houses, figured out, hey, maybe do you want to sell this house? It's vacant. Maybe it's a pain for him or a pain point. Well, one guy ended up, I don't know how he turned the table on me with this conversation, but he ended up hiring me. He didn't want to sell the property, but so I just agreed to work for him. I thought
Hmm.
that was cool. Get a way to learn how to do it, learn what he's doing. And eventually I ended up buying one of his houses, and that was my first property.
Welcome to the Real Freedom Show, where we inspire you to pursue your passion to gain time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Let's get some real freedom together. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Real Freedom, where we talk about different ways of building time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. If you want to get started on your real estate investing journey, check out our website, freedomthroughrealestate.com. It's where we put all of our content, articles for you to be able to see what other people are doing, learn, and hopefully get inspired by other people's stories, because it's all about taking action. And you can listen to podcasts, go to websites and all that, but find a way to take action inside of real estate in a way that it's exciting for you. And I'm super excited today to be able to share another awesome story for you. We've got Tom St. John. He is the founder and managing partner of North Corp Capital, based out of Toledo, Ohio. And so excited, Tom, to learn from you and hear about your journey for our listeners to be able to be inspired and find their way into real estate as well. So welcome to the show, Tom. We're excited to have you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks a lot for having me. The name of your podcast was that's exactly what I shoot for, freedom, and teaching other people how to achieve freedom. So
Yeah.
real excited to be here, Mike.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about why real estate for you and how you got into real estate and kind of how that journey first started.
Okay, yeah, I'll take you back to where around 2005, my dad, I tell the story a lot. He had a heart attack on a golf course, and he worked in a power plant for 32 years, shift work, weekends, overtime, and this heart attack kind of forced him to leave his job. And I remember him being in the hospital and just saying, whatever I got, I'm kind of done. Well, fast forward a couple of weeks after that, we get this big package in the mail, and I'm real excited. I go out and bring it into the house, and we tear it open, and it's this big telescope. And I don't know if I was just at that age, but my dad had worked for 32 years in a power plant, and it was like this telescope was his reward, and that just like symbolized something to me of what 32 years of doing what you're told, doing what everyone tells you to do, what that really gets you. And my dad didn't have much in his 401k, he was kind of forced to retire, and he kind of had to figure it out, and live off of way less than he had planned. So I looked at that telescope, and I just kind of vowed at that moment to find another way. Back then, we didn't have a bunch of podcasts like we do now and YouTube videos. So, I went to the library, and I tell people that, especially younger people, a lot. There's a lot of value in books. I don't think people read books as much as they should these days, but I read hundreds and hundreds of books on real estate and business, on how to make money on eBay, everything I could about just entrepreneurship. But the common denominator always kind of led me to real estate, and that's kind of where I found my passion, and I was addicted to it from day one. You didn't need a ton of money to start, and it seemed like the perfect vehicle for me to be able to scale.
Yeah, interesting, because I had a similar story with my parents, seeing their W-2 journey not end how it should have.
Yeah.
Kind of early retirement based on, them being older. Hey, we can hire new people for cheaper, and just kind of see how they were phased out. And I remember thinking the same thing of like, well, if that's what you're supposed to do, right? Get a good job, fund your 401k, and everything will be happy. And then it didn't work out that way. It's like you got to find something else. So kind of in that same boat.
Yeah, I think it's just a lie that we're told about money, or maybe because it's not very common knowledge to to take another route. You just kind of follow in the path of what you're told, what your teachers tell you in school, and not that there's any ill intent. It's just the teachers don't know either.
Yeah. So you're interested in real estate. What did you look at, keen in on? And then what I love to hear from people is kind of making that leap from I own no real estate or no rental real estate to now I own something. Kind of talk about that moment getting there for you.
I actually I drove around. I found a couple neighborhoods in my local market that I was familiar with, and I thought the prices were where I could cash flow a little bit. And I started calling for rent signs. Kind of another thing that's not too popular these days, with online search engines. But I called for rent signs. I found a couple landlords with vacant houses. Figured out, hey, maybe do you want to sell this house? It's vacant. Maybe it's a pain for them or a pain point. Well, one guy ended up, I don't know how he turned the table on me with this conversation, but he ended up hiring me. He didn't want to sell the property, but so I just agreed to work for him. I thought
Hmm.
that was cool. Get a way to learn how to do it, learn what he's doing. And eventually I ended up buying one of his houses. And that was my first property, which wasn't until 2006. I had some credit stuff to clean up, some down payment money to save up. Yeah, 2006, I was able to buy my first one. 2007, 8, and 9, I was able to buy about four houses each year up until we all know what happened in 2008 with the great financial crisis. Prices went way down. I didn't care. That was good for me. But the problem was the credit crunch. I couldn't buy nothing. A guy like
Yeah.
me just couldn't walk into a bank and get a loan. The doors were closed for people like me. So that was the kind of the first challenge I had to overcome is how to build my portfolio. After 2009, I had about 10 houses, but I just couldn't really get any more.
So having 10 houses, what was kind of the aim there? Obviously, you just were trying to find stuff that was cheap that would work. I also like to ask people too to help understand. I think so sometimes buyers try to get too sophisticated now with numbers and returns and calculations, and in some ways it's probably just this looks like a good deal. I'm going to buy it. I didn't even run any numbers or I did back of the napkin type stuff to get your first
Yeah.
10. But how much analysis did you do on those first 10?
Well, all the books I read, I mean, I was pretty good as far as like I would consider myself. I mean, an amateur underwriter back then, but I knew more than a lot of people knew. But
Hmm.
just but then to implement that into real life, I wouldn't say I was very good at that. I looked at a house that was on the market that a 3 bed, 1 bath. I loved the ranch style houses with um, tenants that seemed to like that better. I loved brick. So I didn't necessarily only buy brick ranches, but that is what I kind of keyed in on a little bit. I didn't have a ton of capital either, so I did really light rehabs. If I had a new roof, that was perfect. I didn't have enough money to replace a roof. I looked for houses that just paint and carpet. Carpet and paint, brain surgery. It ain't. That's kind of the motto I went by back then. Just keep it simple. All the stuff that I could do as far as painting, replace flooring. I wasn't even that really skilled as a handyman. I became skilled over the years, and I would encourage people that getting started out to do the same. I wouldn't encourage people to do like major rehabs to start with. Get your
Hmm.
feet wet. What I wanted to build was operational experience. I always wanted multifamily was always my path. I just needed some operational experience, some units under management to be able to walk into a bank and say, hey, I've owned and operated these properties for a number of years. Now I want to step into multifamily. So that's kind of the experience I wanted to gain is the leasing and the operations part of it.
And were you working a job at the same time as that, or kind of how long were you doing that?
Yeah, actually I was a mailman for for a lot of those years. And then one of my dreams in life was to become a fireman. So around that time I got in the fire service. And that actually was very beneficial because in the fire service I worked 24 hours on and 48 hours off. So I just like sacrificed sleep, which I still do that today. But
Hmm.
I had 48 hours off to try to grow my business and search for properties, make offers. So that looking back, I think that kind of helped propel my growth a little bit, getting into the fire service, just because I had so much free time.
Yeah, I've actually trying to think. Had a couple people on this podcast that have been former firefighters for kind of the same reason, and just being able to build up that stuff while you're still continuing your job, and then eventually there's a time where you don't have to do those at the same time.
Yeah, being on the fire department was helpful too because everyone on the fire department has like a little side job. So I got to meet people who do plumbing, people who do painting.
You had
Kind of,
first access to fire damaged properties too, I bet.
yeah, yeah. I never bought any of those. I felt like that was kind of a bad omen, but Yeah, I didn't even realize at the time because I was a one man show for a long time. 10 years. I hired my brother as a maintenance guy, and he died tragically in a car accident.
Hmm.
And after that, it was really tough because I just wanted to be the operations acquisitions guy, that manage the tenants. I don't enjoy all the maintenance, but I went for a long time, kind of doing it on my own. When I finally decided to really ask for help, really find people in the space who are, I had 107 units at one time when I was kind of at my wit's end of what I could manage. And I learned pretty quickly that I was building this business to gain freedom, to gain wealth. And I wasn't really getting any of that. It was actually costing more of my time, and I actually had less control the more units I had, especially doing it on my own.
I was actually just at a lunch today talking to a guy who is interested in investing, explaining like the couple of paths you can take. And I said that's typically where that path leads is try to do it yourself and you end up with a second job or just completely overwhelmed with what you have. And so
Yeah,
trying to find a solution that can scale and or give you the time freedom without burying you in work.
yeah, exactly. I didn't really know that path existed, to be honest with you. All the books I read and stuff, it was all about, operational ownership. And as I've grown through the business, now I focus more on economic ownership. I don't care about the operational ownership. Why would you want to have part of that? It really takes a super high level of expertise and years to build, that deal flow, those broker relationships, the maintenance teams, the community managers, it's almost impossible, if not impossible, to do that on your own, to build a 10 or 20 or $100 million portfolio. No one's ever done it by themselves.
When did the tide start to turn for you then in terms of going from single family into multifamily?
Well, that took until I always tell people it took me 9 years to get started because it wasn't until 2015 the lending, chain started loosening up on banks. At that time I had a bunch of single family houses, so I had the operational experience to go into a bank. The down payment, that's always the problem, right? Everyone
Hmm.
needs 20, you got to come up with 25% somewhere. I didn't know anything about raising capital. I didn't really have a network of anyone with any money. I was the guy that people called when their electric bill was past due. So what I ended up having to do was I held an auction. I like had a fire sale on 10 of my single family homes to be able to, and the auction went terrible, by the way. I mean,
Hmm.
a lot of them sold for minimum bids, but I was able to sell enough single families to be able to foot the down payment for my first multifamily, which was a slow 12 unit building. Within 2 years or about a year and a half after that, I had acquired three more smaller multifamily buildings. And I kind of lived in that mid size 12 to 36 unit multifamily space for a long time. It was
Hmm.
too big for the house flippers to deal with, and I was too small for the big guys to really care about. So I kind of found that little niche for a lot of years.
And then when you were doing the multifamily stuff there with those types of size properties, were you doing maintenance yourself or did you hire that out?
I hired most of it out, but I didn't have like a turnover crew. So I would get vacancies and I would go there the next day, load up a dumpster myself, start painting the walls, and have my maintenance guys, come in if I was going to replace cabinets or do, but I kept them pretty busy just on normal repairs to keep the tenants. I've always been a big proponent of, people don't want to move. They would just
Hmm.
want great service.
Hmm.
So I took the onus was on me to take care of most of the vacancies. I did that for a long time until, like I said, I had over 100 units when I realized I'm getting behind here. I can't do this all on my own. And then I had my daughter, and that's what really flipped a switch for me. Like I did all this to have this life to go golf and enjoy a beach, and there's zero time for that. And having my daughter finally clicked for me, like, wow, I need to re I need to retool here.
Yeah, it's funny hearing your story because I think about we tried to do a flip And I got sucked in trying to do more work myself. And at the end of the day, when we ended up selling it, long story short, we basically broke even. And I thought, well, here I spent all this time away from my family and my kids for freedom. And that never
Yeah.
happened. So I was like, I got to come up with something else. So then that's
Yeah.
when we moved to the larger multifamily because I said, and a ways away from where I live, because I was like, I then can't insert myself into this. I
Well,
have to work through people. So I totally get that.
yeah, finding great third party management is a great tool. You got to be careful. You got to find the right ones and do a good job of managing the manager, right? But I kind of chose to start investing alongside other operators that own and manage these large complexes. Some of them are vertically integrated, have their own management. Some don't, but that's kind of where I excel now. I love going out talking to people, meeting people who own and operate these multifamilies. Now I still do have my portfolio here locally, and I have a
Mhm.
management team in place. But I focus almost solely on investing in other people's deals now and bringing my investor network into those deals, and they trust me because I have the experience of vetting them, understanding the underwriting. Most of these people don't have the time or even want to look at a financial model and figure out what the IRR, where all the red flags and the pitfalls might be, and all these hurdles and stuff. People don't have the time to deal with that. So I actually have a
Mhm.
odd obsession of with that. I like looking at deals like that. So I always invest my money first, so I can very confidently tell my investors, just invest where I invest. I've
Mhm.
done pretty well with that so far, and I actually enjoy it a lot more.
So talk about that for a second. So, you started with putting your own money into your own deals. Then you were, raising money for deals. Now you're raising money for other people's deals. If I'm sitting here, hey, as a firefighter, I worked with you or whatever, and I say, hey, Tom, tell me about this real estate thing. Like, I've only invested in stocks or maybe nothing at all, or, how do I get into real estate? Why would I invest in you? Like, how does that conversation typically go with somebody that you've got, like a good relationship with?
Yeah, well, the first thing I tell them is to not invest in public markets to begin with, period.
Hmm.
The Vanguard and BlackRock, believe me, the guys that are the CEOs of those companies, they don't invest in those funds. They invest in private markets. There's just way less volatility, and there's a lot better growth and compounding. When you invest in private markets correctly. Now, I have the one of the first investments I ever made was in a bad operator. It was a great deal. The numbers worked. The projections were phenomenal. It was exciting, but I kind of fell for the noise a little bit, and I lost a big chunk of money on my first one. And that's when I started my company, North Corp Capital, to really dial in with the investors. So when firemen and other people talk to me in the industry, I can very simply walk them, 5 or 10 minutes through an underwriting deal and really explain the underwriting, why it's conservative, and why these projections don't even have to work for the deal to work. You can look at like an underwriting model and see like a 4 or 5% rent growth projection, and if that's what it requires for the deal to work, that's kind of a red flag.
Hmm.
Or the cap rates, if they're buying it at a 6 cap, but they're projecting on selling it at a 4.5 cap, those two numbers, those two metrics alone have a very exponential impact on the outcome of a property. And I can make
Hmm.
any deal look good on a spreadsheet.
Yep.
So those are the two things I like to point out to, especially a new person investing, and then they can see, how the numbers could work. I guess what I mean is if I show them how I stress test the deal, it's way easier to lose money like staring at a laptop than it is in real life. So that I
Hmm.
can show like this is what has to happen for this deal to not work.
Yeah. Yeah. I was a finance major and I tell people like you can make numbers tell any story that you want. So
Yeah,
you've got to be able to, especially with investors, be conservative, right? And you want, we're trying to create wins for you versus trying to pad numbers that we couldn't produce. And then all of a sudden you're going to be mad at me 3 to 5 years down the road because it didn't hit the projection. So we are trying to be accurate, but you've got to dig into those numbers to know, is it accurate or am I just trying to get your money?
yeah, yeah. When you talk, like you hear all the time, like the you know aligned incentives, and that's all great to talk about. But like, let's see that, and so I'll be able to show the people how their investor how the investment is aligned with the investors. Do the people get paid based on performance or based on fees? And that's
Hmm.
kind of the number one thing. If there's, I don't mind an acquisition fee or even an asset management fee, but is this company just a holding company? They're just getting paid to hold properties and they're just charging fees, or do they get paid to perform?
Hmm.
Some of the deals I invest in, I don't know if, I mean, as a syndicator, I've syndicated several deals. You might make a little bit of money on the front end, but you're making almost all your money on the back end. In the middle, where you're managing the property, there's not a whole lot of meat on the bone for the syndicator. I call it brain damage. So I look at that like, if the investor wins or if the syndicator, the sponsor wins before the investor wins, the incentives are not aligned. And I can usually point that out pretty quickly on a model.
Maybe for people that might understand the numbers and what you're talking about, they still have to be able to make that leap and invest into real estate. And so, for some people it's hard because it's not their decision, right? If somebody's going to sell, right? I could go buy my own duplex and hey, times are tough or we got this bill coming up, let's sell, which even then you might not make money at that point. But
Yeah,
people have to release control. And so you really are putting a lot of trust in the person you're investing with and their operation because yeah, I
yeah.
can't be like, you know what, guys, in this big building, I'm out. I want my money back. I want to sell. No, you're investing in a group and you don't have that voting right that you would if it was just I'm buying my own duplex.
Yeah, I think for me, I hate like the salesy or um, those kind of tactics. I just tell people my story, and people will say that a lot of the time. Like I'm afraid to give up control, and I'll tell them, no, you're gaining control of your time. You know, what do you want control of? Of the building or of your time? Why would you buy a building to begin with? So you can earn more money and create more time on the back end. So when I walk them through my story and how that absolutely led to zero control. I might have had more money, but I had no control of my time. I would walk around with my daughter, always wait. You're a phone call away from the every day is an audible, you know. And
Hmm.
so when I walk people through that story, and a lot of people who know me that saw me go through those periods, they saw how busy I was, golf outings I had to skip, just stuff like that. So I just kind of like to share my story. And it helps for me as a fund manager now that raises money for other people's deals when they see that I invested
Hmm.
my money. The
Hmm.
last guy who invested with me, I didn't know previous. He actually called me a couple weeks later. Well, it was a couple months later when he got his first distribution, and he said, "Hey, man, you know why I invested with you?" And I thought I knew, but I was like, "No, why did you invest with me?" And he said, "Well, because if I go down, I know you're going down too." I was like, I thought that was hilarious. I told him I was going to put it in my book. You know.
Yeah, that's funny. For better or worse, at least somebody else is suffering along with them.
Yeah, exactly. That just gave him enough peace. Like, hey, this guy's he's gonna go down with me. That's fine.
Are you looking to get started or scale in real estate investing but don't know your next step? Are you overwhelmed thinking about finding deals, analyzing deals, doing due diligence, and managing properties on top of it? Go ahead and push the easy button and invest with us. Real estate investing is what we do full time. We've done dozens of deals with hundreds of doors. We have the knowledge and experience to handpick the best deals that most investors can't find. We've got large off-market deals all the time where you can hopefully find returns and economies of scale that you just can't find on your own. The best thing is it's 100% passive to you for less capital than you put down trying to acquire a property on your own. Don't let this year go by where you don't make the leap, add to your portfolio, or you just sit in analysis by paralysis. To find out more, visit freedomthroughrealestate.com and click on invest. You can book a call and learn more there. So get to scaling your portfolio now with us by your side. That's freedomthroughrealestate.com and click on invest. So talk about the process of kind of vetting out these deals and vetting out these operators and what's the type of stuff you look for?
Well, mainly when I had my first deal go really bad as a passive investor, the number one thing that the first red flag was the communications. The transparency in the numbers, in the communication. Communication on that first deal, after the first month of distributions was fine. Then the second month, the third month, it took about 6 months, and I stopped hearing from them. They stopped responding. there was no system of reporting or communication. Also, so I look at that. Track record is very important. I look for people who are very like laser focused. They have a niche. They don't have properties all over the country. They buy some self storage. They buy some C class major value add. They do some class A institutional stuff. They got some vacant land over here. I like people who are just laser focused on a certain market, a certain type of property, and they become experts in that particular field or that particular niche. That's kind of things I look at. And I look for people with integrity, people I like. I'll fly, like next week I'm going to Texas to fly it and meet some people. I try to walk the properties a few times a year, meet with the guys, go in their offices, meet their kids. And you get to know people like that when you're not just sharing emails back and forth.
And then the nice thing is you have building through relationships. You don't have to go find your own deals, right? You're working through people that are trusted, have track records, have done it before, and are people that you totally trust. And so in a lot of ways, now you don't have to be worried about where's my next deal coming from. You just got to build a lot of great relationships.
Yeah, that's what I like. Real estate, like we talked about before the show, it's such a broad industry. You can find there's so much to do in the world of real estate. I mean, I really love it all. But you kind of find what makes you happy. And now I do love finding deals. And so sometimes I interject myself into some of these guys like, hey, did you see this property? And they said, yeah, Tom, we saw it, man. So I still like to do that. But the other thing I know these guys very well, some of the different groups that I like to raise for. And I'll ask them, tell me about a deal that went bad. And they'll tell me how they navigated that bad deal. Like if every property that this certain firm sold was in 2022, at the height of all that COVID, and you could sell anything you wanted and make money. I say, nah, let me see something else. Let me see what happened in 2008 or times like that. But yeah, building relationships is what I really love to do. And what I've learned is through raising capitals, people don't invest in deals, people invest in people.
Absolutely.
Real quick, I think another good avenue, and after the last cycle with rents, cap rates were getting compressed and there were some really iffy deals going on. I didn't invest much in any real estate deals over the last 5 years. So I started finding some other vehicles like private credit funds, real estate debt funds, where you become the bank. I mean, the house always wins, what's better than being the bank? So I encourage people to explore those opportunities too. They're not equity plays, but I earn 12%, annualized return paid monthly just on some private credit and real estate debt funds. I think those are super powerful too. So in the world of private investments, I mean, multifamily is king. I always say it's the vault, but it's not always the ATM machine. There's some other avenues too that I would encourage people to explore in the private space.
Absolutely. And Tom, you're certainly a wealth of knowledge. So much stuff we didn't get a chance to talk to today. For people that do want to learn more and do want to connect with you deeper and hear more about what you've got going on and some of the specifics, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can go to my website, northcorpcapital.com. I have a ton of free resources on there. You can download for free. I'm active on Facebook, but probably most active on LinkedIn. You can just search Tom St. John and find me on LinkedIn and send me a text or an email, and I respond personally to everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom, and excited to see where you guys continue to go and what you invest in.
Awesome, man. Thanks a lot for having me.